everyone, it's Jessie from b.a.r.e Flower Farm coming to you with another numbers heavy video. In this video, I want to talk about my 2024 sales goal and projections, but more importantly, I want to talk about how I got to those projections and how I'm making a plan for making sure that it is realistic for me to achieve that sales goal. So for those of you who are new to my channel, my name is Jessie. I'm entering to my third year of flower farming. I live in zone 7A in New Jersey, and I don't grow on a lot of space. I grow in a 40 by 90 foot fenced in area, and this year I am shrinking that a little bit. So last year, I actually sold about $10,000 worth of flowers. I actually just published a video earlier this week about everything that I made in terms of revenue related to b.a.r.e Flower Farm and the costs associated with that, so that you can get an idea of what my cash flow or profitability look like for the 2023 season. Going into 2024, my goal is to double that. I would like to sell at least $20,000 worth of stems. So I'm going to break down how I'm going to get to that $20,000. Now, I think that this video is relevant for those who are both experienced and completely new growers. Oftentimes in the flower farming world, I see the planning that happens this time of year solely focused on crop planning. What am I planting in the upcoming season? And perhaps is that going to create enough bouquets that I want to sell, maybe like 20 a week? But what I want to see people do is take that to a next level. What are your goals, even by month? What is your total sales goal for the entire year? And I know that a lot of people don't know where to start. So this is going to be a good video for you to get a basis, because I'm going to walk you through my process. And then at the end of walking you through my process, I'm going to give you a couple of questions that you should be asking yourself if this is all completely new to you to get you started. So let's start with this high level goal objective, which is I want to sell $20,000 worth of flowers in 2023. So then the next obvious question becomes, well, how do I get to that? So what I did is on a spreadsheet, I laid out by month and by channel what I would expect to sell per channel. Now, I know that this is going to be difficult for people who have never grown and sold. So this type of exercise is more applicable if you've had at least a season under your belt, because you'll have experimented with at least one sales channel and you'll know roughly what to expect. But if you want to grow your sales channel, this is a really good opportunity for you to think about what does that growth look like in your sales channels. So for me, when I lay out my sales channel, it's really two main buckets with some sub buckets. So my first big one is wholesale, and my goal is to shift more of my sales into the wholesale bucket in 2024. The next bucket is retail, and the retail is broken up into subcomponents. So I've got a CSA, I've got a la carte bouquets, and then I've got a local country store that I am selling bouquets at during 3 of the 4 seasons of the year, and that is one that I would like to grow. So knowing the sales outlets that you want to sell at and then having a projection for those is already a really great first start, and I would say is just one of those things that you should prioritize putting on paper if you have not done that yet. I will say that once I got to the later months, so that would be from like June until October, I was now doing a high level projection of what I would like to sell, at least in the wholesale channel, because I sell at a co-op that is about an hour's drive away. It is during the work week, and then I have to drive at least an hour and a half back up north in the opposite direction. So I want to make those visits count, and I want to have a ambitious but realistic goal in terms of how much I want to sell through that outlet. So what was great about this exercise was in a couple of scenarios where I wanted to sell at least $1,500 in wholesale. So like for the month of August and September. Now I start looking at my crop plan and seeing when things will bloom. And I start saying to myself, okay, actually what I have planned is only going to get me to like $900. How do I fill in the gap of that extra $600? Are there crops that I could be succession planning more deliberately so that they can come in higher volume? So for example, zinnias and cosmos I know will do really well in the months of September and October, especially at that time when the other growers have a lot of dahlias. And this year I observed that there wasn't a lot of other complementary focal flowers. It was just mostly dahlias. So how can I help fill that gap with those designers? So I put in a little bit more for zinnias and cosmos, and on the side I know, okay, I need to start more of these in July for me to hit that number. Then I also have a lot of lilies that I'm growing, and lilies are a very programmable crop. So I'm also using lilies to fill in any big gaps in terms of sales that I would need in order to achieve my goals. So for example, I am now adding lilies to my September lineup, which means that I'm going to calculate backwards when I need to order them, when I need to plant them for them to bloom in September. I found that my LA hybrids, which are unscented, did really, really well in the fall. So I'm actually going to try to increase the amount that I plant and therefore sell based off of these sales projections. So I think that this type of exercise is really important because you can look at it in one of two ways, right? You can look at it in terms of here's the historical data and here's what I would like to increase. Maybe I want to increase by like 50% in terms of what I sell, and therefore here's the new projections. Or you can go from it backwards, which is this is what I would like to sell in terms of a numerical sales figure, and then here's what I would need to grow in order to get to that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later in terms of how to concretely use that top-down approach process. I think it's worth noting here some of the other learnings that I had and key takeaways. So the aha that I had here was I'm going to be having a lot of desirable focals for my co-op at a time when other people are also going to have those desirable focals. So a really good example is Lisianthus. Lisianthus are really sought after by designers, and our designers go crazy for them. However, everyone is going to be increasing their production of Lisianthus. I will be growing at least about 500 to 800, I would say, depending on how my germination goes with those that I'm self-sowing. I did order a couple of trays, but I will probably be one of the smallest growers in volume for that. There are other growers who are growing by the 1,000. So unless if we get a significant uptick in the amount of designers who are coming at that time of year to buy Lisianthus, we might actually have oversupply versus the demand of that. So it made me think, if I can't sell all these Lisianthus to wholesale, then how can I sell it in the retail route in a profitable manner? So I find that Lisianthus can be quite profitable in the retail channel, assuming that you are able to grow Lisianthus well and they can get multiple buds per stem. So I thought about, hey, why don't I do a deluxe type of CSA offering? I find that in the summer, people are less excited about a CSA, especially one that is like weekly or even bi-weekly. People end up traveling, they're on vacation, they're not always home. And then some people also grow flowers themselves that they bring into the house. So what if I offered one deluxe bouquet a month priced anywhere from $25 to $30 and featuring key focals, right? So Lisianthus would be one of them. If you grow dahlias, dahlias would be another really good one of them. I even have sunflowers as one of them, because if you grow the varieties of sunflowers that people don't typically see, that can also be a really, really good mix and a profitable bouquet for you to sell. So long story short, it made me think, okay, I should actually do a CSA in the middle, starting from June and until September. So that's 4 months of, we'll call it $25. I'm confident I could sell at least 5 shares, and that gives me an extra $500. I actually think I could sell more than 5 shares, but this also just gives me the confidence that, hey, in case I can't sell all of my stems wholesale, I'll have sold enough in the retail channel to at least pay back for the cost of my plugs. 2 other observations here I want to point out. If this plan comes to fruition, I will have then shifted 70% of my flower sales to the wholesale channel, which feels like a really good number to me. I think ultimately I would love to land on that 80% number, but 70% would be really, really great if this actually works out. The other thing really worth noting is that half of my sales in this $20,000 figure will come from tulips, which is pretty astounding to me. So I will have, if all things goes well, have sold half of the amount that I want to sell by April. And that will be equivalent to what I sold in totality in 2023 for flowers, right? So I sold a little bit over $10,000, and that is what I'm projecting that I should be able to do by April if all else goes well. And remember, I am moving the majority of my tulips through wholesale. So I'm hoping that this goes well because the implications are that next year I can continue to ramp up winter tulip production and then scale back in other times of the year where it is honestly either not as profitable or it just takes a lot more labor and effort for me to sell. The greatest thing about the winter tulip stuff is that one, when I sell wholesale, I'm shipping, so I'm not driving anywhere outside of going to FedEx. And then for the CSA, I am hiring a driver as well as I have pickup. So it's very low effort in terms of selling for me. I feel like during the later parts of the year, the effort in selling goes up. And not to mention harvesting tulips, bunching them together, when you're winter forcing is also a lot less labor intensive. So for all of those reasons, winter tulips are a very profitable crop for me as of right now based off of my data. And I would say that for every bulb that I force, it's a little bit over $1 in return in profit, right? So this is really great because in my last video where I talked about where I ended 2023, I had just under a $4,000 profit. And the year before I had been in the hole for about $8,000. So I could potentially climb out of my hole by the time April rolls around. And of course, I will have other costs, but it's really nice to know that I will have a profitable crop that sets me up for the rest of the year. One other observation that is definitely worth mentioning is the fact that I am now going to double my sales revenue using the same amount of space. If anything, I'm actually reducing the space that I grow in. So remember, I have a 40 by 90 foot fenced in space in addition to the inside infrastructure that I use for forcing winter tulips. But effectively, I am able to squeeze more out of the same footprint because I am focusing either on more profitable flowers or focusing on turning the beds more frequently, right? So this is like intensive farming here. Last year, I was really caught up in weeding because I didn't really have a weed management plan and I didn't really have a succession plan. So by virtue of not constantly planting into the same bed, you're not focusing and I guess weeding as much as you would be. So I'm hoping that this year with a smaller footprint and with more intensive farming that I will be able to be more on top of the weeds while generating more output and therefore more revenue. And I bring this up because there is this perception, especially amongst newer growers, that you need a lot of space. And look, if I'm able to achieve $20,000 in sales of flowers through a relatively small footprint and as a side hustle with a 9-to-5 job, then that should really give people a lot of hope in terms of what they can do in their backyard. I've had people who come to my backyard and say, you have a lot of space, but you're actually not growing on that much space. If I think about how much I grow, we kind of grow on the same footprint. And the answer is, yeah, I really don't grow on a lot of space. I have a lot of very generous walkways too, right? And that is intentional. So my goal here is to not overdo it, not get burnt out. My goal is to really maximize what I have before expanding. And I think that in year 3, I'll have dialed it up much better than I have in the prior seasons. All right, so if you're a new grower, you're probably thinking, well, this is really nice and I wish I could do this, but I don't really have enough data to be able to do something like this because I haven't grown yet and this is gonna be my first year. So let's talk about what questions you should be thinking about and the thought processes you should be going through in order to plan for 2024. The first main question is, what are you growing and when will they bloom? So do something similar to that video that I referenced where you put by month when you expect things to bloom because that will be your key reference document here. Then the next thing you want to think about is the sales channels that you're looking to sell. Are you looking to just sell retail, or are you potentially looking to even dip into wholesale? So my advice for people in year one is always, if you've had experience growing, there's really nothing stopping you from selling wholesale, assuming you have quantities, consistency, and you know how to treat your stems post-harvest, right? There's really nothing wrong with selling to florists in that first year. But if you've never grown before, you might want to focus on retail first. So let's talk about how you can project with retail. And let's make it really, really simple. So on the retail side, the question you want to ask yourself is, how many bouquets do you project you can make per week? So again, you're going to reference that document that I just talked about, when are things going to bloom, and you're going to ask yourself, based off of how many plants I have out there, how many bouquets can I realistically expect to make? And then you're going to ask yourself, how many weeks can I expect to have bouquets? So there are going to be certain weeks where you might be able to pump out 20, and in other weeks you can only pump out like 5, right? So this is the time for you to think about, what are those low times, especially in the spring when we're waiting for flowers to come in? What does the realistic potential look like for you? And you potentially need to change your crop plan because of that, right? So how many weeks will you have bouquets is the second piece of it. And then once you figure that out, it's a very simple math equation. It's the number of bouquets that you plan to have times the number of weeks you plan to have those bouquets. So let's say you plan to have 20 bouquets for a month straight. A month has like four weeks, right? So 20 times 4 is 80 bouquets there. And let's say for the other months, you think that you're probably only gonna have 10 bouquets. So for 10 weeks, you're gonna only have 10 bouquets, which is 100. So 100 plus the 80 that you had before is 180. Now, how much are you gonna sell those bouquets for? If you sell them for $10, then your revenue is only $1,080. And if you sell them for $20, then you double that to, what is that, $3,060, right? So you can see here how you can play with just the number of bouquets and even potentially help inform your pricing based off of how much you want to make. So again, start from your goals. What high level number are you looking to target? Because that will definitely help you inform a pricing. One of the most common questions you see on the Cut Flower Facebook groups is, how much should I price this? Rather than how much should I price this, start backwards, right? Start from just how much do I need to price this? And if you need to price it at $30, then what does a $30 bouquet look like? Are you overstuffing for a $30 bouquet, or do you need more, right? So you get where I'm going with this. It's a very similar concept if you want to apply this in the retail realm, right? So again, retail, typically you need a lot more volume, but what you're really looking at is how many varieties are you growing and how many of each of those varieties will you have? What is the price per stem that you will sell at? And then it's simply, what is the volume times the price per stem to get you to that number? And you're probably gonna have to do this equation multiple times for the various crops that you will have, but this will also give you a good idea of, do you have the quantities to do wholesale, right? So wholesale is typically sold in bunches of 10 straight stems. Sometimes for bigger things, you might sell them in like bunches of 5. So for example, like I would sell my lilies sometimes in bunches of 5s. You might even sell like woodies in bunches of 5s, right? But the point is that when you start doing this exercise and you start looking at what you are growing and the quantities that you are growing in, you will get a much better idea of, okay, like maybe it doesn't make sense for me to pursue wholesale at all because I'm not going to have enough stems, and maybe I'll be able to sell to a florist like twice in the season, and then that will be it. So part of the selling or the relationship building with a florist is having the inventory to be able to sell to them on a relatively consistent basis. Some florists who who value having local flowers are going to be okay with inconsistency, but for the most part, florists want reliability too, right? They want a reliable supplier. They want to know that, hey, if I have an event out on this day, I can count on this grower to provide me with those stems. So for me, it's kind of like, if you really don't think you're going to have the stems, I would push it off by another year until you have the quantities to do wholesale. So let's wrap this all up with an example. And this is what I call a top-down approach. So we're going to start with someone who has an ambitious sales target goal. Let's just say that you want to sell $10,000 worth of flowers. I know that for some people that sounds like that's a lot. And that was how much I sold in 2023. And I'm here to tell you that it's actually very doable for a lot of you out there. So let's break down what $10,000 could look like. So $10,000, assuming that you only have 5 months of a growing season, means you need to bring in on average $2,000 a month, right? So what you're gonna see in this example is I'm gonna be chunking down or breaking down these numbers into digestible pieces. And that is where the planning is, right? Like you're trying to get to on a very specific level what you need to do. So you need to break these big numbers down. All right, so we're talking about $2,000 a month here. So each month has roughly 4 weeks. So what that means is that would be $500 a week that you need to sell, right? Because $500 times 4 weeks is equal to $2,000 per month. So can you sell $500 a week? For some of you guys, the answer is actually going to be yes, even though you don't realize it. And for some of you, it's going to be no. So what does $500 a week look like? So let's just say that you're selling retail. Let's break that down into bouquets. How many bouquets is that? That's about 25 bouquets a week, assuming you are selling at a $20 price point. $20 or 25 bouquets a week is not a very high number, but it's also not a low number. I will say that in my first season, 25 bouquets consistently was pretty hard for me to generate because I hadn't nailed down crop planning. Things would come in all at the same time, so I'd get more than 25 in a certain week, and then the weeks after, I would really only have like 7 or 8 bouquets, right? So this is where dialing in your crop planning and having more stems than you expect to sell really makes a difference in terms of making this kind of sales projection. So do you have enough stems for 20 bouquets? So that's on average, we'll call it 10 stems to like 12 stems a bouquet, right? So assuming that you're doing like 10 stems a bouquet for a $20 bouquet, you're looking at 250 stems, obviously divided upon various varieties. So what varieties are you growing? Are they all going to come in at the same time for you to be able to make that bouquet, right? And then more importantly, as I mentioned before, do you have the consistency in terms of being able to maintain that 25 bouquets a week? So maybe your path to $10,000 doesn't look like selling 25 bouquets a week. Maybe it looks like selling 50 bouquets a week in the spring and fall seasons and then dialing it back in the summer when demand is less. Or maybe because you are still in your first couple of years, that's when you're gonna get the most amount of production. So then now you need to figure out, okay, like how am I gonna sell all those stems in the summer to be able to work into that sales figure that you have in mind. The one thing that I have not talked about in these projections is profitability, which is a whole other animal in and of itself. So that is one of the next steps that I have to do. I have to now start thinking about, all right, like what are the general costs that I anticipate for 2024? I actually normally don't have a budget, believe it or not, but going forward, I'm going to at least try to project how much I expect to spend because I want to start paying myself. And the thing that I've always run into when I pay myself is I pay myself and then all of a sudden I have a shortfall in the bank when a credit card statement comes up, and then now I have to repay back into my bank account self-fund and then pay that statement, right? So I want to make sure that I have a much better idea of what my monthly expenses are going to look like. I have some reoccurring expenses, so like subscriptions, education, that kind of stuff. But then there's going to be those one-time big expenses like bulbs. And now obviously I know when those are going to be, right? They're going to be in the fall or in the spring, depending on when I order them. So I'll have a much better handle of that. I do want to put in a plug for a webinar, a free webinar that a fellow flower farmer by the name of Lenny Larkin is going to be hosting next week on January 9th. I'm not getting paid to say this at all. Lenny will actually be coming on for an interview after her book launches. She's been doing a lot of great interviews everywhere. There is one podcast that I definitely recommend you listening to. I will link it in the show notes below, but it is the Growing for Your Market podcast. And let me tell you, when she was spewing out numbers on that podcast, I was like, this is a flower farmer who absolutely knows her numbers. She sounds like she could go onto Shark Tank and pitch her business, and someone could make a informed decision on whether or not to invest. So I'm really excited about picking her brain, and I figure that if her book comes out, a bunch of us will have hopefully read it, then we can also collectively have some questions for her too. So I will be reaching out to all of you for solicitations on any questions that you might have on Instagram. So this is probably a good time to say, follow me on Instagram if you haven't yet. So her book is ready for pre-order, but ahead of that, in a few days, she will actually have a free webinar, and it is called the Pathway to Flower Farm Profitability. So she's going to talk about some of the stuff that I've hit upon here, right? She's going to talk about just a strategic mindset for the farm, reevaluating your crop list. You heard that as a theme in this video here. And then she's going to be talking about surveying your sales channel to determine if they are profitable or not. And that is a piece that I did not hit on. So I've signed up for the webinar. I will be joining it. I hope to see you on there too. But if you made it this far in the video, let me know that you're also a data nerd like myself. I love it whenever people say, hey, I love numbers and I'm a data nerd too. But I also want to say that for those of you who are intimidated by using spreadsheets, so whether or not that's in the form of Excel or a Google Sheets, it's really not hard at all. You just need to know how to add, subtract, multiply, divide, and you can do the very same things that I've done in this video here. Excel and Google Sheets is a very powerful calculator. That's really just what it is. It helps get everything on paper for you, and it does the math for you in a very quick and automated way. So if you just toy around with it and you learn how to use the basics of it, it will go a really long way in your flower farming journey. I really think that that is one of those basic skills or tools that people should upskill themselves to use, because if you're doing everything on pen and paper and trying to calculate it without a spreadsheet, you're spending a lot of time and also having room for manual error, right? Like Excel doesn't make mistakes unless if you enter in something wrong. So that is definitely something that I would encourage everyone to start doing. Anyway, let me know in the comments below if you made it this far and if you have any questions for me. So after all of that, I hope that I will see a lot more people planning and having a realistic sales goal, or even having any kind of sales goal for 2024. And I will see you in the next video.